today. First up, Douglas Burdett, the man, the myth, the marketing legend. We're honoured to have him here to interview Mark. Now, many of you know him as the brilliant mind behind the Marketing Book podcast, one of the most respected marketing and sales podcasts out there. He also led his own successful marketing agency for many years, and we are thrilled to have him here today. And of course, the man of the hour, Mark Schaefer, consultant, keynote speaker, college educator, blogger, podcaster, and the author of 11 books. Let's get on with it right now. There you go. As the crowds fade away.
Crowd fades. Ian, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for producing this lovely program. If you've never seen one of Ian's productions, you're going to see lots of little interesting, entertaining things. So, Doug, we're just going to turn it over to you. And I am so honored and a little bit nervous because you and I have a tradition. When I have a new book, you're the first one to get the book. Often I've sent you the author copy that I receive. And so we also have a tradition that you were the first one to interview me. And so this is not rehearsed. I don't know what you're going to ask me. This is my first interview on the book, so I'm a little nervous, but so honored to see you, my friend. I think you're on mute, Doug.
You see, I'm retired, so I forget to do things like turn off my mute button. So there, that's called being authentic. Which is covered in the book. So one other interesting thing about Mark Schaefer is that he is and will forever be the king of the Marketing Book podcast. I interviewed him more times than any other author. I interviewed him about 10 of his books, and then I interviewed him 2 other times. And Mark said, that he wanted me to interview him again because he doesn't feel like his reputation has been sufficiently tarnished by associating with me. And I can understand that. He has a very high threshold for pain. And I should add that, as with every interview I did with Mark, I did not share my questions with him beforehand. So His Majesty is in no way responsible for the contents of this interview. And I should add that this book was, I was in a glass case of emotion. There were so many things that came to mind, so many other books, so many memories of Mark's other interviews, and I was delighted to see that the book has been endorsed by a number of authors whom I've had the honor of interviewing multiple times, including Dr. Robert Cialdini, Dr. Philip Kotler, Dr. Jonah Berger, Rohit Bhargava, David Meerman Scott, and Dory Clark. So before we begin, and we won't have as much time as we normally did on the Marketing Book podcast, and as a favor to the audience and Mark, I've eliminated all the goofy sound effects that I used to have. And for that, I apologize to the loyal listeners out there. But if there are any Marketing Book podcast listeners out there, Mark, you know what that means, right?
Yes, I do know what that means.
It means that there are a number of ridiculously good-looking people on this call from around the world.
Yes,
so
yes. I know there are.
Oh, you've met them. They come up to you. That's right. So that's never going to change. Before we begin, let me read just a couple of real quick excerpts from the beginning of the book to set the stage. From the beginning, I've spent nearly 2 decades researching and writing about one crucial problem. How can our marketing messages become the signal above the noise in a world of oversaturated content? And on page 3, one word kept pounding in my brain: audacious. Audacious. Is that what it takes to stand out in the world today? Competence doesn't create conversations. Competence is ignorable. But audacity, that's the currency of attention in our overstimulated world. What if the key to becoming the signal isn't shouting louder, bending AI prompts, or spending more, but the simple human bravery it takes to be a little nuts? And on the next page, I found the greatest marketing breakthroughs don't necessarily come from superior AI intelligence or rapid-fire data analysis. They come from tapping into our humanity, collaborative relationships, connecting dots in unexpected, even seemingly illogical ways, following a gut instinct, detecting the subtleties of emotional cues, celebrating our flaws. and overcoming obstacles and constraints. Success comes from feeling brave enough to unleash a little crazy, break taboos, and take risks, even in corporate cultures that don't like risks. Here's the problem: maintaining human relevance in an AI world. You can't take classes or get a new degree to outsmart AI. Your only hope is to out-human it. This book explores how marketers can out-human the omnipotent AI masters. And finally, audacious is an ancient word meaning daring, intrepid, brave, spirited. Would customers pay attention if you infused audacity into your marketing? Of course they would. This book is divided into 3 acts that explore disrupting the medium, the narrative, and the storyteller. A 4th and final act addresses measurement using AI to our human advantage and personal courage. Each section contains research to ground the idea, signature case studies to inspire you, and dozens of practical tips, more than 100 in all, that you can apply to your marketing and business today. So, Mark Schaefer, say more about why you characterize this as the anti-AI book.
I think we're living in this world, this time where it's almost like an existential question. If you've immersed yourself in the world of AI, you can't help but be a little concerned about what's happening as AI starts to nip at the heels of our skill sets, even at the heels of our careers. And I've sort of become obsessed with this idea. And as you know, Doug, in all my books and all my writing, I'm a realist. I'm a practical person. I don't like to sugarcoat things. And as I look at what's going to happen, I think the idea that competent doesn't cut it anymore. What are our options? Somehow we've got to dig deep and unleash the human fireworks that are unique to us. And that is just not happening. I've got research that I demonstrate in the book that shows most advertising, like 2/3 of advertising and marketing, is dull. We're in a pandemic of dull.
Mm-hmm.
It's not creating this emotional resonance. We're wasting our time. We're wasting our money. And so it's time to break loose. And so I created this framework. I had this opportunity to meet so many amazing people, and the dots kind of connected for me. And I felt that this was an idea. It's the right framework. It's the right idea for the right time, I think, for a lot of people.
Yes, and it's so interesting you say in there competency are they're just table stakes, and yet we see so much of that in marketing communications. Now, on page 8, you write that most marketing is boring, intrusive, and desperate, and that the idea for this book germinated as you observe the problems bedeviling every marketer you know. Say more about some of those problems that are bedeviling marketers these days.
Well, I think the biggest problem that we all face, I think every person listening to us today, whether you own a business, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a marketing professional, you have one pervasive struggle, and that is to be seen, to be heard, to be discovered. And if you look at the trajectory of my career, really starting with the first book that I wrote, which was the first book on influence marketing, describing how the power has shifted in the advertising and marketing world, really to the people. The theme of a lot of what I write about and talk about is how do we become the signal against the noise? And now we're facing this AI threat where I saw a statistic recently from Amazon hosting AWS, the hosting service, that claims that more than 50% of the content on the web is now AI generated. And so, and now it's learning from itself, right? It's scanning the content on the web and it's learning from itself. So really, and what's our role in this, Doug? What's the role of our voice? What's the role of our content? Our content, our voice, it's the glue that holds AI together. And what are we getting out of it? Not even attribution, let alone business. So it's got to be a time to think differently. It's got to be a time where we think about, I refuse to be ignored in this new world. And so
Mhm.
that's the passion I have behind this book.
One of the topics you talk about, which you've mentioned in some of your other books, is marketing is happening without us. And
Yeah.
companies don't realize that. And I think it even goes back to a McKinsey study from 15 years ago. Talk about that.
Yeah, the McKinsey study, yeah, actually was over a period of 10 years that ended in 2019, right before the pandemic. And it showed, quite logically, if you think about it, I think most marketers would agree with this, that two-thirds of our marketing is occurring without us. It's what's being posted online. It's what people are telling each other and word of mouth marketing. It's what people are posting, reviews and testimonies. It's even what these influencers are talking about, right? And to me, an influencer doesn't necessarily have to be someone famous. It's someone who could spread an idea through an audience.
Hmm.
And when you think about it, Doug, this is really the greatest and most important mindset for marketers today. People may not see your ads in your marketing. If they see it, they probably don't believe it, but we believe each other. So the
Hmm.
mindset today, and this is uniquely human. This is something the AI cannot touch, is how do we create something so interesting, so worthy, so unmissable that people can't wait to talk about it. They can't wait to tell other people about
We
what
trust perfect strangers more than we trust what companies
That's
say.
exactly right. That's a famous statistic from Nielsen. 92% of adults will trust something from a stranger before they'll trust, an ad. They'll trust a review or something posted on social media.
Yeah.
So it is very, very powerful. And that is uniquely human. That is unadulterated by AI. And we need to embrace that as one of the ways that we can stand out in this noisy world.
Well, let me just ask one other question from the intro, and then maybe we have time for one or two questions from the four acts. But you write that this book, filled with groundbreaking ideas and norm busting notions, is the story of marketing awe. Explain what you mean about marketing awe.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I really think that's one of the most important contributions of the book. And it started with a study that I saw many years ago from a friend, Steve Racin, who is the founder of BuzzSumo. And he studied billions of pieces of content and discovered that the one word most associated with content that goes viral is awe, the word awe, which makes sense. It's like, wow, I've never seen that before. And I never knew what to do with that because to me, awe is like the Grand Canyon or holding a newborn baby or listening to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. How do we systematize? How do we integrate awe into our marketing? Well, then I read this book by Dacher Keltner, a social psychologist, that said there's something called everyday awe. It's the collective effervescence. It's an emotional contagion when we bring people together in certain ways. So, like even today, I feel awe just talking to you, to renewing our connection, our conversations. Right? This is an awe-inspiring moment for me. I actually felt a little emotional when we got on for the first time. AI can't do that. So, how do we bring people together in our businesses? We're living in this world of loneliness and isolation. And most young people today are consuming their entire world through earbuds, alone in their bedroom, and they're missing shared experiences. So, this is a very, very important idea in the book. I think it's really a breakthrough idea in the book. What would your business look like if your marketing plan was add more awe? And
Yes.
I think this book creates a framework to help people think about things that way.
Yes, and just so the audience knows, this is enormously frustrating for Mark, not just because I'm interviewing him, but because we are only able to scratch the surface of this awe-inspiring book. Now, let me just ask one question from the first act, because I think we only have uh, 15 minutes left, and Ian said if I go over, it will be painful for me. He really frightened me. So, um, in chapter 3, you quote the social psychologist and author Jonathan Haidt, who a lot of people have heard of, who said, I love this. He said, our brain is a story processor, not a logic processor. Explain what you mean when you write, and some people may completely miss this when they hear it, when you say the story is everything.
Yeah, the story is really, I think, in many ways, all we have left in marketing. And I'll just
I
give
think
you,
it's a term a lot of people may not understand, or everyone has a different idea of what it is.
yeah, and I think to me, I have a different sort of take on stories, marketing narratives, and storytelling. And I think one of the biggest myths in marketing today is the gurus that say that your marketing begins with your narrative. It begins with your why. It begins with the arc of your story, right? And here's the truth. Nobody cares. They care about their why. They care about
Yes.
their story. And and when we can ignite the customer's story, the customer's success, the customer's concerns. Those are the best stories that we can tell. And I think if you look at some of the themes in the book, it's about bringing people together. It's about creating this emotional contagion of sharing stories. It's not about people pounding their chest saying, "Look at how great we are." Again, it's about integrating into a customer's everyday life and presenting something and creating something that's so cool that they can't wait to tell others about it. So
Yeah.
that's sort of a different take I have on the story.
Yeah, and it brought to mind, I think it's attributed to Antonio Damasio about we are feeling machines that think, not thinking machines that feel. And
Mhm.
there's so much resistance to using any kind of emotion. Now, speaking of emotions, um, in Act 2, Chapter 8, you write that breaking taboos and overturning familiar storylines is an unmined motherlode of marketing inspiration. Now, without taking off your clothes, Mark, explain what you mean there.
So Doug is referring to a story in the book where a couple of friends of mine took off their clothes during a big presentation at South by Southwest. And the point of this of their story, it was a couple fellows from the Taboo group in Australia, and they said we would rather be humiliated today than be forgotten. And the point they were making, and the point that I make in the book, and it really builds on some research by an author I admire very much, Jonah Berger, who you mentioned earlier, Doug, and he wrote a book called Contagious, and he did this research about what makes things go viral. And the most powerful thing that makes things go viral is some emotion. And then if you can ignite this emotion between your company, your brand, your story, and the customer, that's when things really take off. And he said, when you can ignite a high level emotion like love, like happiness, like anxiety, like fear,
Or disgust.
disgust. Now,
Back to the Marketing Book Podcast listeners. Yeah.
and here we are. How many people in the world? How many people in the world in marketing and business are looking at this idea of maybe making people anxious with their marketing? And this is an untapped gold mine. I've got lots of different examples. Now, this doesn't mean being reckless. This doesn't mean being offensive. This doesn't mean breaking the law. It means breaking bad rules for good reasons. It
Right.
means
And I should
breaking.
also add, it doesn't mean going off strategy. The strategy is everything.
That's right. No, it all starts with strategy, and that is certainly repeated in the book multiple times. I think part of the beauty of this book is this is not Mark Schaefer's take on the world. I got to talk to some of the greatest creative geniuses in the world. This is their story. This is their idea. And every single one of them says strategy, strategy, strategy. So
Well,
the thing about breaking taboos is just thinking about, how can we get out of Vanilla Valley? You can get out of Vanilla Valley by creating something exceptional and happy and fun, but you can also get out of Vanilla Valley by creating, anxiety. How many of you can remember a time you couldn't find your car in the parking lot at the airport? But I bet you forget all the times you can find it. So it's these moments of tension that really become integrated into our heart and into our minds.
yes, and I can tell you that usually I can't find my car when there have been a lot of free drinks on the flight. So where you mentioned emotions, and this is really important, particularly to business folks that I see not done very well. And there, of course, every page in your book, there was other books that came to mind that would go into great depth. Most significantly, Talk Triggers by Jay Baer and Daniel Lemon. And if you liked that book, this is a wonderful companion to that. And you write about that book. But let me ask you, which kinds of brands have greater emotional connections with their consumers? Would business to consumer or business to business, and why?
Well, you know, I, I'm sort of at the point where I'm kind of like breaking these molds, and I'm breaking some of these buckets that we put people into. I think in many cases, people are people. We consume content the same way. We're ignited by the same sort of passions. And, you know, in B2B, maybe the negotiations are longer and maybe the stakes are higher, but in a few minutes, we're going to be talking with Mark Simons, one of the co-founders of Giant Spoon Agency. And I mean, they've done amazing work with companies like, General Electric and Hewlett Packard. They've done a tremendous amount of work with B2B. And yet they're finding ways to break through the noise and to demand attention in new ways. There's a kind of a lovely story in the book about a B2B agency that landed $1 billion contract because they sent cupcakes to the purchasing manager. They were unable to get a meeting with this person, and it wasn't the cupcakes. It was the story because they had custom made cupcakes and they gave them like a little atlas that showed the story behind each cupcake. That landed them the meeting, which ended up in $1 billion worth of business. So, I
Mark,
mean,
my
I
time
think,
is limited. I want to ask you to
okay,
to follow up on that, and that is when someone's making a B2B purchase versus a B2C, you have research in the book that shows B2B is a much more emotional purchase. There
oh
is
yeah,
much more at stake. You hire the wrong roofer for your house, that's on you. You
yeah,
hire the wrong company for your B2B, that's your career very often.
yeah. I mean, and I grew up in B2B, and I
Yeah.
mean, at the end of the day, especially I actually have signed a $5 billion contract. And yes, I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, but one of the intangibles is you cannot put everything in a contract. At the end of the day, you want to sign with people who you can trust, who are not going to let you down. It is about the relationship.
And ruin your reputation. Yeah. And the more you can dial into those emotions
Yeah.
with many of the things that are in the book, that's great. Let's jump to, oh, let me ask one other quick question. Quick question. A small budget isn't a limitation, it's liberation. Explain.
Yeah. And I have lots of personal experience in this and have a fun story about this. fun story in the book about one of the greatest creative breakthroughs happened with a group of people in a bathroom at a Hilton hotel. So you want to read that story. And
Mark,
one
we
of the,
agreed not to talk about that.
well, we're not telling the details. Um,
Okay.
but there's lots. I made a special effort in this book because to showcase lots of diverse B2B, B2C, nonprofits and universities and, big showpieces like we see from Giant Spoon. And I mean, here's an example of B2B. Just happen to have this here. This is from Batesville Products. This is a casting company in Indiana, and they can't get people to work at their plant. Nobody knows what happens in a casting plant. So they made these children's books and they're going out in the community. Now, these books cost a few dollars to produce, but this is a B2B company telling a story in a whole new way that has filled their pipeline. And so there's lots of low budget ideas in this book too. I mean, sometimes
Lots. Yeah. In fact, if
money
you
is
have too much money, it can be a curse.
money is it can be the bane of creativity.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me just jump to one other thing from the third part that I thought was very interesting. And it's my favorite chapter, chapter 12. Please don't tell the other chapters I said that. But in that chapter, you tell the story of a workshop you presented on brand communities to one of the biggest consumer products companies in the world, and that a primary marketing benefit of a community is creating organic advocates who spread the brand stories to their friends and families. And afterwards, one of the brand managers approached you and asked, I understand the importance of getting customers to tell our story, but how do we control their message? And you go on to write that the old marketer clutches the microphone, desperate for control, and the new marketer hands out megaphones. Explain what you mean when you write that we must let go to grow. And this kind of goes back to the 2/3 of our marketing happening without us.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is one way I think that small to medium-sized businesses have an advantage right now,
Mm-hmm.
because I work with lots of different kinds of companies, and I've been so fortunate to work with some of the biggest companies in the world, and these are companies that are tethered to advertising, agencies, and they want everything to go through the agency. They want to control the message. But the best agencies, we're going to be hearing from Giant Spoon in a minute, they encourage their customers to have the courage to do something so great that people will spread the message organically. And that is a new mindset. And I've lived in both worlds, and I certainly have empathy for these big companies that want to control the message. And that was really the main message of Marketing Rebellion, the book over my shoulder here, which is, that's the third rebellion, is that companies are not in control of the message. Our customers are in control of the message. A
Let
brand,
your customers do your marketing.
they're the best marketers.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that is marketing today. Help your customers do the job.
Yes. And in that
Hey,
section, you also talk about the importance of influencer marketing. I just wanted to mention that. And again, we're not talking about getting one of the Kardashians to tweet something. Influencer marketing, one of the most underused approaches is getting your employees, encouraging your employees to be your influencers, not getting them. I shouldn't have said that, but those that want to, it's enormously persuasive, very believable. And I thought that was really very powerful. Um, one of the things from the end of the book, because this is all we have time for, is the how do we adopt audacity, as you say, bring the thunder, and drive change in a resistant workplace while keeping our jobs, which I'm sure will resonate with every one in the audience. Talk about how you've been able to poke holes in a resistant corporate culture with the old pilot program trick.
well, this is in a chapter which is called The Most Important Chapter in the Book. That's the title of the chapter because I believe it's true. And it's at the end because the whole book I've been encouraging people to, go get out of the box and to be bold, to be audacious. But then we have to think about we got to do this without losing our jobs. And so we've got Sharon Joseph coming on in a few minutes, by the way.
Yeah.
She's going to be talking about this. She's basically created her whole career by poking at corporate cultures.
Yeah.
And the idea
Well, and
about
we're going to hear about that. Let me just ask one final question in this
Sure.
last minute. It's a true or false question, Mark Schaefer.
Oh boy, now I'm scared.
True or false? In the long run, the most audacious thing you can do isn't to be different, it's making a difference.
Yes, that is true. That is very true. And those are the last words of the book. And Doug, thank you so much for coming out of retirement to help me. There's lots of people here listening today just because they saw you were going to be here. They love you. They want to support you. And thanks so much
And my
for helping
pleasure. And for
me.
those that are wondering, I don't always wear a coat and tie at home. I'm actually going to speak to a university this afternoon where I've spoken for a number of years, and this is my farewell to marketing talk. But the real reason I'm going is there might be a cake. Hey, you
I'll be
never know.
sure. Yeah, if there is, send me a picture of it. I want to see it. Thank you, Doug.
Pleasure.